Be still. Kamisato Arc. Suyu.
I'll protect us. Yeah. Temple.
Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about Nahida, one of the most broken 5-star characters in Genshin Impact, and also the newest one we just got, the Dendro Archon. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is talking about Nahida and her place in the meta, explain why she's actually so good and if I believe you should pull for her, how needed she is for meta teams, and cover everything you need to know about her place in the meta, her playstyles, and her different teams. I'm also going to briefly cover her builds before getting into a showcase of all of her best teams that we found so far, explain how to play them and why they are so powerful. That is therefore going to be the focus of this video, showcasing her strength, teams, and how I'm building her, whereas my next video is going to be more traditional Nahida guide, where I will go into much more detail on things like your weapon rankings, when certain stats can be better than others, advanced tips, and going over things like which build is better in which circumstance, as there is a lot of nuance to Nahida's builds and kit. And the reason why I'm splitting this into 2 separate videos instead of making my standard day 1 guide is because Nahida's kit is extremely complex, and my guide would honestly be 30 to 40 minutes long, which is why it is very important for me to have a dedicated video on how good I believe she is and her meta teams, show you guys how to play them and show why they're so good, and then also give you guys a full detailed guide as I always do in my next video, where, as I said, I'll break down builds, abilities, and weapons much more so that it has a different purpose to this video and that they can complement each other without having to make just one like 40-minute guide, which would also be a lot more stressful for me. And with that said, I want you guys to know that I had a lot of time to play Nahida before she came out on a media server, which is why I get to give you guys such complete information day 1, as I've gotten to play her for many hours. And as always, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you want to catch me live. And with all that being said, I don't want to take up any more of your time in the intro, so let's get right into it. All right, so starting things off, I want to quickly give you guys a rundown on Nahida's base kit, why it's so good, and why she's going to be the premier Dendro option as of right now. While I will include more specific details in my next video, right now I want to tell you guys why she's actually so good and how her abilities work. In fact, her elemental skill is an ability that will mark enemies either by pressing it and hitting the ones around you, or by holding it, triggering a camera with very long range that you can even spin around in to make sure you're marking everyone with, and that will mark all the enemies you see with a seed that will trigger every time you proc a reaction of any type, even if your Nahida is off field. Because of that, this ability will inherently make Nahida a really powerful support, as once you use your ability, even if you swap out of her, anytime you proc a reaction, your elemental skill's passive effect will proc, deal good damage, which scales on her attack, but also her elemental mastery, which is important, and it will reapply Dendro to enemies every single time it hits. Because of that, Nahida will just be good at constantly applying Dendro and dealing good damage. Her elemental skill, as you can see, can trigger every 2.5 seconds, and the C's last for 25 seconds, allowing you to have really good uptime on this ability. Now, do keep in mind, one of the reasons why elemental mastery scaling is so good here on your skill is because not only do Dendro reactions scale with EM, but also Nahida has passive talents that will buff her own kit based on how much EM she has. For example, she can gain up to 80% bonus damage and 24% crit rate if she has 1000 elemental mastery, which can be something to go for, although even with a bit less EM, you will still get a ton of damage bonus and a ton of crit rate, which is honestly insane. By stacking elemental mastery, you'll increase your skills damage, your reaction damage, and also gain damage bonus and crit rate, which are all very powerful for Nahida. On top of just that, when you use your elemental burst, you will buff your on-field character's elemental mastery by 25% of your highest party member's EM up to a maximum of 250, which is going to be great for reaction teams. This can buff your Nahida herself or another character in, let's say, a Hyperbloom team where you want your Electro character to proc reactions and not your Nahida. If that wasn't enough, her burst is also quite good in the sense that it will buff your elemental skills passive effect. While it doesn't do damage in and of itself, it buffs how your elemental skills passive will work based on the elemental types of your other party members. If you have a Pyro character, it will increase the damage of your skills passive. If you have an Electro character, it will decrease its cooldown of how often it can proc, and instead of being once every 2.5 seconds, it will be more often. And if you have a Hydro character, it will increase the duration of your elemental burst. Do keep in mind you can have all of these effects up at once if you're running all 3 of these elements, or like 2 of the 3 if you have 2. And also, if you have 2 characters of the same element, the effect that you're gaining, the buff, is going to be even more powerful. Because of that, and the fact that its base duration is 15 seconds, which is higher than its actual cooldown, this means that you'll have good uptime on your burst, which will buff your skill, and your skill, which is the main part of your kit, will deal good damage, apply good Dendro even from off field, and allow you to stack elemental mastery, among other things, which we'll cover in the build section, to have really good damage. I do also want to mention that since she is a Catalyst user, while her kit is fully functional from off field, you can also choose to run her on field, as your normal attacks will be infused with Dendro, because that's how Catalyst attacks work. So you can get even better Dendro application from on field, as your off field one is pretty good, but on field it is insane, as you're constantly applying Dendro with your normal and charge attacks, as well as your skill, giving her that other playstyle of being able to be ran on field and apply a ton of Dendro. Now, as you guys can see, Nahida's inherent kit, just her base kit, is very good. Being able to buff your on-field character with elemental mastery, being either her or another party member, while also being to increase her own damage bonus and crit rate based on her EM, allows you to get a lot of value from that stat and a lot of value from her skills elemental mastery scaling, while also having the upside of having really good Dendro application, especially on field with her normal and charge attacks applying Dendro, but also having a good enough amount from off field for a lot of different team comps which we'll cover, where just her elemental skill in it of itself will be constantly applying Dendro on enemies and enabling so many reaction teams. Because of that, she is going to be the best Dendro option by far, as the Dendro main character is still good and has their niche and is a really good free-to-play option, but Nahida just kind of blows them out of the park in most circumstances. This is because of Nahida's really good personal damage, buffing abilities, and also just more Dendro application, which makes her the premier choice. To show you how versatile she is, she can be ran in pretty much any team comp that needs a Dendro character, being Bloom teams, Quicken teams, Burning teams, and others, which we'll talk about briefly, while also being relatively easy to build. Because of that, I believe her place in the meta is a solid one. I genuinely believe Nahida is a good character to go for, a very strong one of the best 5 stars we have ever gotten. But do keep in mind, this video is going out as soon as Nahida's out, so we will still discover more about this character, but as of right now, she does seem quite insane. Now, with that said, I do want to include a disclaimer. I don't think she is someone that you should feel forced to get. I do feel the need to say this because I feel like a lot of viewers are going to see Nahida being advertised as insanely broken, and trust me, she is really good, and then feel the need to like spend their primo gems or spend money. And I don't think the game is at that point yet, because obviously floor 12 of the Abyss, while it is challenging, doesn't require the absolute best units, so I don't think you should have that fear of missing out. But with that said, I do feel strongly about Nahida. I enjoy her playstyle and animations, while also acknowledging the fact that she is very meta, really good, and I do highly recommend her. But again, don't feel forced to pull for her, even though she is very good. I just wanted to put that somewhere in the video before moving on and continuing to say good things about her. With that out of the way, the main thing I want to talk about in this video is her different teams and showcase why they're so good and how they all work. But before we do that, I want to give you guys a quick rundown on the builds that I am going to be using in this video, give you my thoughts on them very briefly, because that's what I feel like a lot of people want to know. But also, there's a lot of nuance in it and a lot of different builds that are viable and situations where one is better than the other, and when you should go EM over crit or crit over EM, how much EM you're looking for, what sets are better in which situations, which is why I'm going to go in the nuance of that in my next complete guide, while just giving you guys the generic answers right now, if that's what you're wondering, so that you can actually build her properly day one, while also giving us time to math out all of these specifics and give you guys exact answers for every team and weapon in the next video. So with that said, how are you building your Nahida? For your sets, you can either go Deepwood or Gilded Dreams. Deepwood decreasing the Dendro resistance of opponents and giving you Dendro damage bonus, and then Gilded Dreams giving your Nahida an insane amount of elemental mastery, maximizing her reaction damage. You can either go one of these two sets or mix and match 2 pieces of either Deepwood, Gilded Dreams, or Wanderers, and which set you should go for depends on a few things. Again, there's a lot of factors that go into this, so I will cover this in my next video, but a brief recap is going to be, if no one on your team has Deepwood memories, give it to your Nahida. She's a very good wielder of this set, can get really good value out of it, and it's usually the best set overall if no one else in your party has it. With that said, some less offensive supports, like for example Zhongli or Nilou or Kokomi in certain teams, can run Deepwood for you, in which case you can go Gilded Dreams for a bit more personal damage for your Nahida. That is sort of the TLDR of the artifact section. Gilded Dreams and Deepwood are both good. I typically recommend Deepwood, but if someone else on your party has it, then you can go Gilded Dreams, or if you just have much better substats on it, both of them can be good, as well as mix and matching 2 pieces. For the artifact stats you want on your Nahida, this depends on an insane amount of factors. Like genuinely, this is partially why I'm splitting the video into 2, to actually be able to get over when each substat is exactly going to be better. But a TLDR is going to be elemental mastery is insane for her, but damage bonus and crit is also very good, because her abilities, normal attacks, and skill do actually scale on her attack as well, and so can the spread reactions, which is why crit is so good. But elemental mastery, increasing your reaction damage and your skill damage, and also having your passive talent, which will give you damage bonus and crit rate based on your EM, makes it an insane option as well. Because of that, here's what you're supposed to be doing. Since both of your passive talents cap out on 1000 EM, getting up to 1000 elemental mastery is going to be very efficient. With that said, you don't need exactly 1000. Well, you usually don't want to pass that 1000 threshold, because everything past 1k becomes much less efficient, and then at that point crit is going to be way better. Getting either 1000 or near 1000 is usually going to be a good idea. Now with that said, the more you play Nahida on field versus off field can change this, as well as your team comps and external elemental mastery buffs like the Gilded set, supports like Sucrose, Elegy for the End, Instructor, and even your passive talent that can give you up to 250 elemental mastery if you're on field, or 200 if you have 800, giving you a total of 1000, and a lot of factors that I want to save for my next guide video so that I don't waste too much time in this video, as it does get quite complex. In general though, I do want to say that it does depend on your substats. For most players, I would recommend going Elemental Mastery Sands and then either a Elemental Mastery Goblet and Circlet or Dendro damage and crit, or mix and matching, you know, like Dendro EM or EM crit based on your substats and which ones you have that are better. For the weapons I'm running on Nahida, there are many good options, and the best option for you depends on your playstyle and team. There's a lot of specifics that go into which weapon is the best and why, but in general, you're either going for weapons that give you Elemental Mastery or crit. Attack weapons aren't quite as good. Because of that, the really good options for her are going to be her signature weapon, the 1000 Floating Dreams, the Kagura's Variety, which is Yai's signature weapon. Lost Prayer can also be good for an on-field build, or for 4-star options that are also very good, Sacrificial Fragments for Elemental Mastery, Witsith for crit damage and also a really good stat bonus on the effect, Solar Pearl, especially for an on-field Nahida, Magic Guide as a free-to-play option that can also give you quite a decent amount of EM, or more niche options like either the Favonius Codex, especially with refinement, if you're on-field and need energy for your team, and also the Hakushin Ring is a viable option if you have Electro and Hydro supports, although it isn't my personal favorite overall. Map Amari is pretty good too, especially on-field when you can make use of the effect. And lastly, the Wandering Everstar, if you have it, can be decent for the EM and the attack buff to your team. With that said, there's a lot of nuance that goes into when each weapon is good, some being better on-field, some being better off-field, and also depending on your ratio and teams. So more on that, as well as an exact weapon ranking in my Nahida guide coming out soon. But honestly, feel free to use any weapon that I mentioned in the section, as they are all quite good, and I want to give you guys good information right now without having to make you wait. All right, next up, let's talk about Nahida's best teams, or at least my favorite ones that I have found to be very powerful. I'm going to include a showcase on screen as I talk about them and give you guys my thoughts on every team that we will be covering. And while I will be covering the exact details of which characters you want to run in every team, like the different options if you don't have the best characters for every slot, in my guide video coming out next, right now I want to at least take the time to talk about why these teams are so good and how Nahida works in them. The first one I want to talk about is a Hyper Bloom team. The way Hyper Bloom Nahida teams work are by pairing Nahida with a Hydro and an Electro character and stacking Elemental Mastery on said Electro character, who can then proc the Hyper Bloom reaction as you are constantly blooming and then popping the seeds with your Electro character. This Electro character can be many different options. Generally, it can be like Kuki on Elemental Mastery or Raiden on EM as well, but obviously other Electro characters can work also, like Fischl or more offensive options. But typically what I would recommend doing is running an Electro character who can stack Elemental Mastery, making sure they proc all the Hyper Blooms, and then having a flex option as your last slot to support your team. This can be another Electro character who won't hit the blooms, so they won't steal any Hyper Blooms from your other Elemental Mastery built character like a Beto, whose burst doesn't bounce to the seeds, or you can even run an Anemo option like Sucrose or Kazuha, who can actually Hyper Bloom for you and swirl everything together, or off-field supports like Albedo or Zhongli, who can just increase your overall team DPS. Overall though, you just need to know that this team is really good, and Nahida's good Dendro application, Elemental Mastery buff, and good damage make this team even stronger. Moving on, one of my absolute favorite teams for Nahida is going to be just pure bloom with Nilou. Nilou is a character who felt incomplete without Nahida because previously her best teams revolved around running two Dendro characters, the Traveler and Kole, to make sure you have enough Dendro to constantly apply bloom. While the main character and Kole don't have that much, Nahida, especially when used on field, definitely does. Because of that, you can pair Nilou with Nahida and then two other Hydro characters, one of which stacking Elemental Mastery like Kokomi, Barbara, or even Ayato in a burst off-field build, and then the other one being flexible like potentially a more offensive option like Yelan or Xingqiu, or even another Dendro character if you want to off-field your Nahida. This team does have downsides, like it's hard to group enemies as you're not running an Anemo character because Nilou requires you to only run Dendro and Hydro, and also the fact that you are taking a ton of personal damage. Like as you can see here, while I am doing really good damage, my Nahida ends up dying because I'm taking too much bloom damage, so that is something to keep in mind, and make sure you are healing your characters. With that said, I love Nilou and Nahida's synergy, and I think their bloom teams are very powerful. Moving on, there's also Quicken Nahida teams where you're pairing Nahida with Electro characters and then a flex slot at the end, typically doing Nahida, two Electro carries, and then either an Anemo support or another offensive option. The reason this works is because you're now going to be applying a lot of Dendro through Nahida, spamming the Quicken reaction, allowing you to get aggravates and spreads, buffing your Dendro and Electro damage, and there's many team variations here you can run. I'll go more in depth on character selection in my guide, but TLDR, you can pair Nahida with powerful Electro carries like Keqing, Sino, Beidou, or even an on-field Yai Miko, and the team will perform very well. Your second Electro character can be any generic support like even Fischl, Lisa, Beidou, or literally any Electro character, paired up with someone like Kazuha, who can swirl Electro and increase your elemental damage significantly. On top of that, I wanted to add a small showcase of my Quicken team with Yai Miko, where as you can see, I am clearing quite rapidly, doing really good damage with my Yai being an on-field auto attacker. At times, it is more of a quick swappy team. I am swapping between a lot of characters, using a lot of abilities, but doing attacks with my Yai, which will proc aggravate and do actually good damage, as well as also being able to do auto attacks on my Nahida and just use everyone's skills and bursts together for a really powerful team comp, and something I really wanted to show off in this video. Do keep in mind this team comp can work with other Electro carries as I mentioned, and Yai can also be used as a more supportive role with another Electro character, this is just one showcase of a team that works really well. Moving on, you can also run Burgeon, which is another variation of Bloom, where you either run Toma, or one that I like a bit better is Kazuha, where you run Kazuha with Bennett and then can use Bennett and Kazuha's infusion to proc Burgeon, or even Bennett's C6 if you have it. However, I do want to mention that Burgeon's not my favorite team in the meta right now, but it can work with Nahida. Now, while there are a ton of teams that I will cover in my guide, the last one I want to talk about here is a Burn Melt Ganyu. The reason why this team works and how it works gets really complicated, but to give you guys a brief rundown for now, basically if you use a charge shot on Ganyu on a pyro infused enemy, Nahida's skill will proc from off field as soon as you proc the melt reaction, and then will start burning. And after that, if you do a charge shot at the right time, you can manage to proc melt on your Ganyu's charge attacks and then also reapply the burning in between them. The problem is when I do this in practice, oftentimes I'll be either too fast or too slow and mess up the timing, and also any small variations will mess this up. If you use Ganyu's skill or burst, or if Zhongli's pillar hits an opponent, or if you move, it will mess up the timing of this. It is very strict, and you either need to be almost frame perfect and get your second shot in before Nahida's 2.5 second cooldown on her passive is up, or shoot slow enough to make up for it. And so in general, this team does have some difficulties, but I wanted to mention it as just a team that works, but more information on that in the next video. A more conventional way of using this team, however, is if you do actually want to run not just one application of pyro with, let's say, Bennett's burst, and run someone like Bennett, Kazuha, Nahida, and Ganyu, where Nahida can be a really powerful buffer to your Ganyu, giving you up to 250 elemental mastery. With that said, while this team is very good, I personally would still rather run Zhongli instead of Nahida, as while the resistance shred that Zhongli gives you may not be quite as high as Nahida's elemental mastery, the shield offers you protection as you are charging up your charge shots, making your quality of life a lot better and making Ganyu a lot more playable without having to worry about being interrupted. And so yeah, that about sums up my initial thoughts on Nahida, the teams where I think she shines the most in, why I think she's so good, and also a brief rundown on her builds. Now, as I said many times throughout the video, I will be releasing a complete guide in a day or two, going into much more detail on like which weapons and artifacts you should be going in certain situations, advanced tips, and more information about the team selection, so do stay tuned for that. I wanted to split the video in two because I want to give you guys good information day one without having to rush a guide, and also information that complements each other without having to make a guide that's like 40 minutes long, as there's a lot to talk about, and I wanted to address specifically certain teams and her role in the meta and why it is so good. With that said, I want to end it here. Let me know what you think of this format of video. I don't plan on doing it with that many characters, but I thought it was appropriate here, so do leave your thoughts down below. With that said, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.